Welcome to the How of Business with your host, Henry Lopez, the podcast that helps you start, run, and grow your small business. And now, here is your host.
Welcome to this episode of the How of Business. This is Henry Lopez, and my guest today is Harry Max. Harry, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thank you, Henry.
So Harry's with us today to share his insights and tips on managing priorities. He's written a book on it that we're going to talk about, and how improving prioritization skills, as I'm calling it, leads to better planning and smarter decision making. This is a big topic for all of us. So how do we get better at managing priorities is what Harry is here to share his expertise and some highlights from his latest book. To get more information about the How of Business, including the show notes page for this episode, and on the show notes page is going to be a discount offer from Harry on the book. So you'll want to go there. Just go to thehowofbusiness.com. That's also where you can find information on my one-on-one coaching and group coaching programs is at thehowofbusiness.com. I also encourage you to please subscribe wherever you might be listening to this episode so you don't miss any future episodes. Let me tell you a little bit more about Harry. Harry Max is an executive player coach, consultant, and hands-on product design and development leader with vision and a solid grasp on operations. He is a managing partner at Peak Priorities, LLC. And so Harry works with senior leaders and their teams to help them realize their visions by zeroing in on pragmatic solutions to complex challenges. Harry's experience includes having been a founder and CEO, an operational leader, and strategy consultant with startups and innovators and global brands, including Apple, Adobe, DreamWorks, Google, Hewlett-Packard, Informatica, Microsoft, PayPal, and many more. He's an early pioneer in e-commerce, as Harry was a co-founder of Virtual Vineyards, or wine.com, where his designs powered the interaction model behind the first usable and secure online shopping cart. So the book that I've been referring to, Harry is the author of the new book, Managing Priorities: How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. Harry lives in the Santa Cruz, California area. Once again, Harry Max, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Henry.
All right, we'll get right into it, Harry. The book, Managing Priorities: How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. The question I always ask is, why did you write the book? And I know there's a lot there to unpack, as we were just talking about before we started recording. What is it that drove you to this? And who is it for? So let's start with the first part. Why did you write this book?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a surprise. I was giving a talk at Adobe on diagnostic thinking and creative problem framing. And it's a talk I'd given at South by Southwest. It's a talk I'd given at USAA. And I was fascinated. At the end of the talk, I touched on the topic of prioritization, an area that I had a lot of experience in, but not something that I really thought was the centerpiece of the work or the talk. And that's where all the questions were. All the hands came up at the end. And, you know, as a product guy, I'm always looking for demand signal. Like, what is it that people actually want? Where is there an unmet need? And I kind of scratched my head a little bit. And that was at the point I had hair. And I called a friend of mine who's a publisher, and I said, Lou, I've bumped into this strange phenomena, a lot of questions around prioritization. I've spent some time doing some research and haven't found any books on it. That seems crazy. It's so fundamental a skill. How could there be no books on it? And he said, that makes no sense. And he went off and did some research and came back and he said, as a matter of fact, there are hundreds of books that tell you how important it is, but actually none of them break it down and tell you how to do it. And that was the beginning of this adventure.
Wow. And this is your first book, or have you written something else? I think you had been part of the Skype Definitive Guide. Is that right? You were an author on that as well?
Yeah, I was the principal author on Skype, the Definitive Guide. Okay. And I've also ghost authored a book on strategy development.
Interesting.
This is really the first book that I've written on my own uh, that's really important to me because I think it's so important to the world.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about that. So I get it that it's interesting that you mentioned that because that's, similar for me as a podcaster when now that I'm at, 500 or so episodes, I'm always looking for those signals, as you say, as to what topic have we not covered that people need help with. And similar to you, this topic of prioritization, as I said in the open, it seems everybody, including myself, is struggles with this, how to do it well. So you obviously have experienced this throughout your career. And the question I want to get to, I guess, on this, and then I'll come back to who is it for. Uh, why do you, in your observation, and you put forth in the book, why do we struggle so much with prioritization?
I think there are a number of reasons. First, we're really good at it in very, very small, very, very near-term situations. See the tiger, prioritize getting out of there, right?
Right.
We have no problem prioritizing in a simple world. The challenge is the world's gotten very complicated. And it's not just complicated, but it's always changing. So it's complicated and it's dynamic. And so I think what's happened is we think we're good at it because, in fact, we're tremendously effective in the most simplistic situations. And that has caused us to deceive ourselves into thinking we're effective in a much more dynamically complicated world.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably the beginning. The next piece of it is it's a deceptively tricky topic. When you actually start looking at prioritization as a topic, it starts to look a little bit like decision making, which on the surface seems very simple. But how many fairly complicated books are there on decision making now? Right. So that's really the root cause.
Yeah, and then as a small business owner, you add to that complexity because not only do we have all of life's decisions, but in as a business owner, especially a small business owner, we have all those other things that we have to get done, and we need to prioritize those things. So what we bring to it typically is the approach of, well, I'll just get more things done. I'll just add more hours to my day. I'll just work on Saturday.
Yeah, and I think the light bulb went off for me when I realized that the most effective organizations in the world, the Apples, the Amazons, the NASAs, those organizations are very, very good at prioritizing. And they are built on teams that are good at prioritizing. And those teams are composed of individual contributors and frontline managers that know how to sort the wheat from the chaff, what's most important and what's least important. And the problem starts where individuals and frontline managers tend to confuse prioritization with personal productivity or time management. But prioritization is actually, it's closely related, but it's actually something different. And organizations tend to confuse it with planning, either annual or strategic planning. But prioritization is actually different than that. It's part of the planning process and it's part of time management or personal productivity, but it's actually its own beast. And the inputs to your plans and your decisions are the options that you have in front of you. And your options are typically the result of your prioritization process. And you're either going to do it unconsciously, automatically, or you're going to do it intentionally and get better results.
I see. Yeah. Here's how I look at it and tell me what I'm missing. The planning is about what do we have to get done to achieve a particular objective. The prioritization is what's most important or valuable next. And then the time management is when am I going to get that done? Is that fair?
I think that's close. I think where I would go beyond that is you can prioritize things other than work. You can prioritize different types of people. You can prioritize risks. You can
Right.
prioritize investments. You can prioritize strategies. You can prioritize decisions. And this is where it starts to unravel for most people. When they think about prioritization, they often think about it in the frame of activities or work or things they need to do. But in fact, if you take a step back, prioritization is really the interconnected web of all of the things that you have to sort through to determine what's more rather than less important.
I see. I see. All right. Going back to the book, I understand, where this initial demand signal came from and the passion that you've developed, how you've seen it, this separating from decision making, which I want to come back to. But ideally, who did you write the book for?
You know, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out who I was writing this book for. And in the end, I wrote the book for newly promoted managers or uh, people who are kind of they, they have a new level of responsibility, or a small business owner is a perfect example of
Sure.
somebody who's got way too much to be thinking about and needs better, more effective structures for thinking about the plans that they're putting in place and the decisions that they're making.
So why do I need to get better at prioritizing? Obviously, that's a bit of a softball question there, but why not just continue what I've been doing, which is just work harder, bring that work ethic, right? Just get more done, delegate. What is it? Why do I need to get better at prioritizing?
Well, there are really two reasons. The first is, how's that working for you?
Yeah,
You know, you can
it's
work hard.
exhausting, it's overwhelming, and like I always say, I could work 24/7 for the next month and still not get it all done, right?
Right. And the second reason is that your competitors, if they get better at prioritization, you're going to have to work even harder.
Mhm. Because they're more productive. They're going to get more of the important things done.
That's right. And that's going to make it harder on you. So in effect, it's just like decision making, right? If you want to keep up and the people around you are getting better at decision making, you're going to need to get better at decision making too. Prioritization is exactly the same. The last thing you want to be doing is trying to keep up when everybody else is getting better.
Mhm. So tell me a little bit more about why it's not the same as decision making.
Sure. The first thing is that decision making is really about transitioning from identifying and ranking options to selecting an option and putting it into practice, right? Prioritization happens before you actually make a decision. It's really about the options, whatever they happen to be, that you identify, and then how ultimately you end up ranking them in order of importance. And that happens before you end up having to decide.
So I'm not know if I'm following, but isn't it kind of like a cycle because I make a decision on what I'm going to do or pursue. Then as I'm doing that, I'm going to prioritize how I get there. But then also the other way around, I'm still confused there.
Yeah, sure. It's a tricky topic, but think about it like this. If you're going to buy an electric bicycle or you're going to buy a car, you're going to buy something expensive, right? There are going to be all sorts of factors that are going to go into how you're going to think about the options that you lay out in front of you. Let's
Right.
stick with an electric bicycle for a second, right? You may say, okay, I really want something that has good range, right? I want it to be able to go 50 miles. I want it to be made by a reputable manufacturer so it lasts for a long time and has a good warranty. And I want it not to cost too much. So those are three criteria that are going into evaluating all of the options in the market. And what you're going to do is you're going to take those criteria and you're going to compare them to the available electric bicycles on the market, and you're going to come out with, six or seven that are going to, meet, satisfy what you think are probably the things that are most important to you. Well, it may turn out that only one or two of them are available in your area, and you want to be able to get service in your area wherever you live, but you hadn't really considered that before. And so ultimately, you say, I'm going to prioritize these three factors, right? Range, cost, and serviceability. And now I've got six to choose from. And then in the end, I can say, well, the one I'm going to select or the two I'm going to consider as final candidates are going to be the ones between this shop and that shop, which are really close to my house. And then I'm going to choose one. That last part of choosing, that's a decision.
Got it.
Everything before it was prioritization.
Prioritization. I start with my broad set of criteria. I'm applying prioritization techniques to narrow it down to what's most important to me for this decision. And then once I've gotten that to help me narrow it down, I'm making my choice.
That's right.
Excellent. Okay. Thanks for clarifying that. Um,
Mhm.
so as you've analyzed this, before we get into the process that you lay out in the book, we'll highlight that here in a moment. Uh, what do you, especially keeping in mind the business owner, as we've touched on already, obviously that's who I am, that's who's listening. Somebody who's either looking to start a business or grow their existing business, and even people who are going to keep their job and start a business on the side, right? Talk about even more things to prioritize.
Mhm.
What are you some of these other things that you find people are missing on learning how to do this well?
I think the key insight here, and we can talk more about this when we talk about the process, is that when you think about prioritization isn't just the act of prioritizing a set of options, right? You actually have to go through identifying those options, and then you may have to decide how you're going to prioritize those options. And so if you step back from the process of prioritizing, it's not just the act of actually ranking a set of items or options so that you have your prioritized list. There's actually a set of things that you want to do before you get there to set yourself up for success.
And so what are a couple of those things?
Well, that is like the first part of the book talks about the 5 steps that go
I
into.
see. I see. So this is the process that you lay out in the book.
Yeah, and in the book I talk about how this is very much like a number of like I worked at a company called DreamWorks Animation, right? I worked on a movie called Shrek 2, right? Fantastic fun and very hard work. 3D animated feature filmmaking.
Mhm.
But when people talk about animation, right, they think about animation as one thing, but actually animation is like 12 or 15 different things. And only one of those 15 things is the actual act of animating a character. And prioritization is the same way. And so if you take a step back and you look at the steps that are involved in prioritizing anything, anywhere, anytime, first it involves deciding whether you have the time and the resources and the energy. You have to triage, right? Do Sometimes you have to just act. You don't have time to sit around and be methodical about prioritizing. Now, the unfortunate thing is most people think that's always true, but it's not. Most of the time, it turns out you do have the time to slow down and prioritize and then speed up into the decision-making process. So the first step is to decide whether you have the time. The second step is to engage in the process. And by that, I mean, who needs to be involved, right? There may be other people that are involved in that prioritization process. Those people might be either influenced by the ultimate outcome that you arrive at, or they might be people who you want to influence you in terms of how you're going about it. So it's decide, engage in the process, and then you go through an information gathering process. So decide, engage, gather. And this is where you actually collect the information about potential priorities, which I call items, and any information about them. And then once you have that information, you determine how it is you're going to arrange it. What sorting technique are you going to use? Is it going to be something like a simple stack rank where you just put one thing on top of another and go, yeah, that feels right? Or are you going to use a technique like paired comparison? Or are you going to use a visual framework like the Eisenhower matrix, the urgency versus important, which is probably the most common one?
Mhm.
And once you've decided you're going to do it, you've engaged in the process, you've gathered information about the potential priorities, you've figured out how you're going to arrange it, then you follow up with the prioritization, the final act of prioritization. I call that process DGAP because what you're doing is you're identifying a gap between what it is that's true now and what it is you would rather be true. And you then go through decide, engage, gather, arrange, and prioritize to close that gap. And those are the steps.
And DAGAP, that's that acronym DEGAAP. Was that what you just said?
Yeah, it's a DEGAP.
Yeah. Okay. I'm curious to pursue a little bit, since you brought it up, your role on Shrek 2.
Hmm?
What was it that you were hired? What was the desired outcome that you were responsible for there that relates to this?
Yeah, I ran the intranet. So that's the company's internal
Sure.
communication, collaboration, and publishing system. Because if you think about it, a 3D animated film like Shrek 2 is one giant software project,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's no actual film. It's all
Right.
done in computers. And so the hundreds of people are at the studio who are at the studio working, whether they're animators or they're production pipeline people or they're lighting people or whoever, they're all working in computers and they all have to communicate, they have to collaborate, they have to document things, and all of that stuff needs to be accessible to people. And my job was to facilitate that through what's called an intranet.
So how did you, in that case, apply this process of prioritization? Give me an example of where you were applying this technique or this approach.
Yeah, well, at one point, the company decided it wanted to go public. And in preparation for that, we had to unify two completely different pieces of the intranet. We had to unify the Redwood City, Bay Area intranet with the LA, I think it was Glendale, I can't remember, uh, with the intranet that they used at the main studio down south. And part of that involved using some new technology. We wanted to use wiki technology, which at that point was very, very new. This was 2003, 2004, right? Long
Yeah.
time ago.
Yep.
And I was looking for who who had the greatest pain inside, which department had the greatest pain inside the organization. And if we could solve their pain by changing the way people communicated, collaborated, and documented aspects of the work that was going on, we would be able to bring the rest of the company along with us. And so the prioritization method that I used was actually about identifying the department that was suffering the most. It was, in effect, prioritizing symptoms of a chief complaint around who was really struggling the most to get their work done, and then focusing on how could we solve the problem for them first, and then communicate that to other people.
Because that was going to be part of critical path to, if you can get that solved, the where you needed the most bandwidth, if you would, the rest would follow.
Yes,
If you
it's not
figured
only
out how to do that, how to convert them, how to get them onto the new platform, if you will, if I'm simplifying it, then that was the biggest potential bottleneck.
yeah, that's exactly right. And not only was it about getting them on board, but that turned out to be the effects group, right? They do the fire and the water and the hair and the really complicated
Yeah.
special effects. And yet everybody in the studio relied on them. So if that department started having an easier time, everybody else would start to have an easier time. So it was kind of a buy one, get one free, if you will.
So if I boil that up so that I could understand it, that by prioritizing, fixing, or addressing that first, you identified that was critical path. Then everything else, it made sense for everything else to happen after that.
Yeah, that's right. It was almost exactly like treating it as a doctor would, by going in and understanding what the symptoms were and then prioritizing the symptoms to get to the chief complaint underneath those symptoms and then solving that for the organization. The organization in this case is kind of like a big, a big living body, right? It's
Right.
it's organic.
This is Henry Lopez with a brief break from this episode to share a special offer from our show sponsor and trusted service partner, Oostas. Oostas specializes in digital marketing services for small business, including websites, SEO, social media management, and pay-per-click advertising. You know how important it is to promote your business online, but the world of digital marketing can be confusing and expensive. That's why you need Oostas, a digital marketing company you can trust and who are dedicated to helping small business owners. I've had the pleasure of working with Oostas and their founder, Adam Kirk, for several years now, and they are my trusted service partner for websites and digital marketing. Oostas really understands that every business has distinct digital marketing needs. That's why they take a results-driven approach to all your digital marketing. They start with a comprehensive analysis of your business, your goals, and your target market, and then they develop a tailored digital marketing strategy that's designed to take you where you want to go online. Oostas is offering a special discount for the How a Business Podcast listeners. Just let them know you heard about Oostas on the How a Business Podcast. And you can schedule a no-obligation consultation with Oostas to see how they can help you with your website and digital marketing needs. To learn more and to take advantage of the special offer, please find a special link to Oostas on the show notes page for this episode at thehowabusiness.com. Okay, I know you covered it here before we got off into that example, but could you give me again at the high level the steps in the process that you explain obviously in detail in the book? Walk me through those steps at a high level again, if you would.
Yeah, sure. It's DEGAP, DGAP, right? You decide whether or not you have the time and space to prioritize intentionally. If you do, you engage in the process consciously by talking to stakeholders, and sometimes those stakeholders are other people. Sometimes they're different parts of yourself, like your inner CFO. Like, I really want that fancy car, but my inner CFO says, bad plan, right? Then you gather the information, the potential priorities, and other supporting useful tidbits, criteria, whatever it is that's going to inform the process going forward. Then you determine how it is you are going to arrange that information. In effect, what sorting techniques are you going to use? Or are you going to use a framework? Maybe you'll use a sorting technique and a framework, or perhaps a marketplace simulation, or maybe some combination of all of that. And once you have that sorted out and you've deduplicated, maybe you have two items that are the same, you can deduplicate things like that. You clean up the stuff so that your items, which are potential priorities, are now self-evident. They're obvious when you look at them. They're not vague or confusing. And then you prioritize. So it's DEGAP.
Okay, and that first step in deciding if I have time, I'm still a little confused there. Is it that there are things that are, a critical fire? I don't have time to go through this. I just need to go get it done. I'm not following that first step on deciding if I have time to go through the rest of the steps. Explain that to me, if you would, please.
Yeah, that's right. The idea behind the decide phase of the DGAP process is to be really honest with yourself. Do you have time to slow down a little bit in order to get a better result?
Yeah. But to me, I always equate that to when you said that originally, and you were sharing that with me before we started recording. That's also the mantra that I always learned in planning, having come from a computer background, that if we slow down a little bit to plan, you're going to be able to then speed up later, right? And get it done right.
That's exactly right.
That's part of what we're talking about here. Huh?
Yep, that's exactly right. And the challenge is that business environments have gotten so high pressured, and there's so much to do, and we're so overwhelmed by all of the different stuff that we've got in our personal lives and our professional lives, that we have assigned a false sense of urgency to almost everything.
Right.
And what that means is that we are no longer prioritizing, and that's because we are not intentionally asking ourselves, do we really have no time to slow down in order to get better results, or can we create a little bit of space to start getting better?
So One of the ways that I see that I try to apply it and I try to help my clients apply this is by that weekly planning of, what might be called big rocks. What are the most important
Mhm.
things? But slowing down at the beginning of the week, let's say either Sunday night or Monday morning, to essentially what you're giving me now here is a better framework to work through deciding what is my priorities. What are my priorities? Am
Mhm.
I am I on the right track as to how I might begin to apply this, especially if I am already hopefully doing some level of planning for my week, let's say, as a business owner?
Absolutely. I think you're on the right track. I think where I would suggest you consider looking a little bit deeper or going a little bit further would be what can you do at the daily level? And the pattern that emerged over the years that I was working on this book by interviewing people, by monitoring what I had learned to do over a period of time, what I was teaching my clients and the folks who worked for me, is to actually create a 30-minute spot in the morning, which I know is a lot of time for some people, but that spot um, is dedicated to identifying what am I avoiding
Mhm.
and what has the highest cost of delay. The longer I wait, the more expensive it's going to get. And then what little move can I make to move my long-term, more strategic projects forward? If I can nail those three things, even if I don't get around to working on them, but if I can at least identify what they are, and then in an ideal world, it attack the thing that I'm avoiding, I will find, and I've seen other people find a lot of energy come from that. And it starts to snowball into a really, really positive uh, more, I hate to use the word productive, but a more productive, more energized, more alive state to go about the rest of the week.
Yeah, no, I love that. And so those three things, those are criteria that you're applying to all of these things that have to get done to help me further determine within my day what's most important next. Am I following correctly?
That's right. And under the most extreme circumstances, when I am completely overwhelmed, the one question I'll ask myself when I pour my cup of coffee in the morning or get my double espresso is, what am I avoiding?
Mhm.
What tough conversation am I avoiding? What thing am I not working on? What am I pretending isn't true? Like, just so I'm clear with myself about the thing that I am stuffing back and procrastinating on. Because if I'm really honest with myself about what I'm avoiding and then figure out how to attack that, everything gets better.
Well, in your observation with yourself and with others, why do we have such a tendency? We might call it procrastination, whatever. Why is it that we tend to avoid those things that are the most impactful, if you will?
In my research, what I learned is it's not really a procrastination problem. It's an emotional regulation problem. And what that means is that it is kind of overwhelming to think about these things.
Yes.
And the challenge, though, is that by stuffing them underneath your conscious awareness, it's still there and it's stuffed with all the other stuff. And so it's not actually getting any better. It's making it more difficult.
Yeah, because I know as the business owner, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to have this difficult conversation. I'm going to have to make this hard decision. I'm going to, whatever it might be. Uh, but I think that speaks to one of the things that I have found that helps with this is when we look at if we can break it down into pieces, or apply this methodology as well to apply the criteria, which is I think in my mind a way of doing that. It makes it more palpable. It makes it more something that I can now attack with some logic. Does that make sense?
It does. And the crazy thing is that it's not just that, but when you actually start doing those things that you're avoiding, it releases really good energy.
Yeah.
And that like fills you with the what you need to do everything else. And it becomes this virtuous cycle of, wow, identify the thing I'm avoiding, tackle that, oh, wow, I feel much better about everything else. And it becomes easier and easier and easier. And then you can do more and more interesting stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that, you called it productivity and momentum. Definitely that's and it's also what helps us as particularly as small business owners, that at the end of the week, you don't feel like, man, I know I did a bunch of things, right? Because I worked all these crazy hours, but that I get the most important things done, the things that are impactful. And that, like you said, I think empowers us to feel like, okay, I made progress this week.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, the selecting of the prioritization method, then, and speak a little bit more to this if you would. You've laid out in the book a whole series of the more common methods, depending on the situation, right? Is how I select then the method, like the Eisenhower method, that might make most sense. Is that correct?
Kind of, yeah. The way that I approached it, because I really struggled with how to structure the book, the way that I approached it is what are the methods that are going to be the most effective if you're approaching prioritization as an individual?
Hmm.
Which ones are going to be most effective for you in a team setting versus which ones are going to be most impactful at the organizational level? I
Hmm.
mean, the fact is there are thousands and thousands of different types of prioritization methods, sorting techniques, frameworks, marketplace simulations. It would take, I mean, I don't even think you could put it all in a book. It would have to be an online resource and it would be huge and no one would make it would not be useful. But there are a very, very small number of incredibly powerful approaches if you're a team, if it's just you by yourself on your own, or if you're a member or leading a team, or if you're part of a larger organization. So I really tried to focus on those.
But is part of your argument that it sure you might argue one is better than the other, but the point is to pick one, to take the time to slow down to apply one.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay, you touched on teams. I want to talk about that for a moment here as a business owner. Uh, what have you seen, or what do you recommend that helps for me to help lead my team members to apply these skills? Obviously, give them the book, but how do I begin to help them or lead them to take time to prioritize?
Mhm. One of the most powerful methods I've run across is a very simple visual framework called Speedboat. And it's like a big picture of a boat. And then you have four different areas. And one of those areas is anchors, things that are slowing you down. Another area is rocks, things that you want to avoid. Another one is uh, propellers, things that can speed you up. And getting a team to identify what's slowing them down or what they're trying to avoid or what would speed them up and so on and so forth, and then focusing on how they're going to address those things is an incredibly powerful way of getting that team to work more effectively together and to, I mean, maybe they'll identify that they need to prioritize on a on a regular basis. Maybe they'll figure out that they have a problem with hiring. Maybe they'll have figure out that they have a problem with managing how new information is coming into the system. But just taking the time at least once to sit down with the speedboat process and go through that exercise to figure out what's slowing them down and what could speed them up is a very, very high leverage activity.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like I'm thinking of it as it's almost like a brainstorming session, but it has a framework here. All right, we've got this problem. Let's stop for a moment. Let's maybe get to a whiteboard if that's conducive in your environment, and let's apply the speedboat framework to think through this. And so you're helping them prioritize by walking them through something that's an analogy that they can relate to.
Yeah. And if they can come up with a list of 10 things that are slowing them down and then rank those and then take the one that's at the top of the list of the things that are slowing them down and figure out how they're going to address that, that's a game changer.
All right. Last question here, and then we'll move on to start to wrap up. Where do you recommend people start on getting better at managing priorities? One place to start, of course, is to read the book. And again, the book that we've been talking about. that Harry wrote is entitled, or titled rather, Managing Priorities: How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. But where else? What's like a quick tip? I'm looking for shortcuts always, that you would say, if you'll start doing this as a business owner, you're on your way, or you'll have an improvement.
Absolutely. I mean, we talked about it a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
I think that the single most important thing you could do is pinpoint the habit in your morning that if you were to connect it to 3 more minutes of doing something around prioritization. So for me, it's my coffee, right? I pour my coffee, I sit down, and then what I recommend is just write down the things you're avoiding and then pick the one that's most important and spend 15 or 20 minutes on that.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
if you do nothing else, that will change your life.
Very simple. I think everybody can relate to that. Ask yourself that question: what am I avoiding? And then apply this process of prioritization to, the criteria, picking a prioritization method, but just slowing down and planning it out a bit, so that then I can get it done, and that'll give me momentum for the day and for the week.
Mhm.
Okay, love that. Excellent. All right. So I believe you've got a discount code that our listeners can use for a discount on the book. Is that correct? Or what is it for?
It is. It's a 20% discount code, How of Business. And if you go to the Rosenfeld Media site and you order the book and you use the How of Business, you'll get a 20% discount, which is a larger discount than other people are able to get right now.
Yeah, that's
That's
fantastic. Again, you'll need to use this link, because you're not gonna be able to use this on Amazon. So I'll have that link that you'll want to go to, and then you'll use the discount code How of Business altogether, and that'll get you a 20% discount on the book.
That's right.
Excellent. Excellent. Speaking of books, as I mentioned before we started recording, I'm always looking for book recommendations. And you had mentioned one, if you would mention it again, that's related to this topic, in fact.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Oliver Burkeman's book, 4,000 Weeks. It's Time Management for Mortals. And it is just a stellar book that helps people understand that you can't just keep doing more faster, right? You actually have to look at time as a finite resource, and you have to approach productivity in a very, very different way. And philosophically, I think Oliver Berkman and his approach to time management and my approach to prioritization are right in line with each other.
Wonderful. Thanks for that recommendation. And again, Harry's book is Managing Priorities: How to Create Better Plans and Make Smarter Decisions. Take advantage of that discount code that you'll find on the show notes page for this episode at thehowofbusiness.com. All right, we'll wrap it up, Harry. The question I always ask is what's one thing you want us to take away from the conversation? I suspect what you're going to come back to is that morning prioritization routine, developing that habit, and then the overall, that what you said was, slow down to speed up. Is that what you would, at a high level, want us to take away from this conversation, or what would you add to that?
No, that's exactly right. I think slowing down a little tiny bit to speed up a lot is definitely where to focus. And, managing that false sense of urgency and recognizing that if you do take the time to slow down just a little bit, focus on the thing you're avoiding, you will speed up and it will feel a lot better.
Yeah, and I love how you do that. False sense of urgency is such a great definition of it. That's, I call it, putting on that badge of honor of firefighter in chief. We fall into, a lot of us as business owners, this thing of, I'm just going to get up in the morning and go fight the first fire, whatever comes up next. I'm going to get to the shop, and just whatever comes next, that's what I'm going to do next. And I'm just going to work until I get everything done. And that's kind of, we develop that as a habit without pausing to slow down, to actually speed up to get more done. Tell us where you want us to go online to learn more, either about you and or the book. What's the best place to go online for that?
I think the best place to go right now is Rosenfeld Media. It's the publisher's site. And I'm still in the process of putting websites together for myself as an author, for a new business, Peak Priorities, that I'm creating. But I think the best place to learn about the work and to learn about me is on the publisher's site.
Wonderful. And again, we'll have a link to that on the show notes page for this episode at thehowofbusiness.com. If you just go to thehowofbusiness.com, search for Harry Max, that's my guest today, you'll find the show notes if you don't have the episode number. And that's where you'll find the link to the book and, again, the discount code. Harry, wonderful conversation. Thanks for sharing this. Thanks for the great book. Lots to learn here. But what I love is actionable things that I can take to add to what I already do to make me even better. So I appreciate you taking the time to spend with me today.
Thank you so much, Henry. I really appreciated the opportunity to be here and talk to your listeners.
This is Henry Lopez, and thanks for joining me on this episode of The How of Business. My guest today again is Harry Max. I release new episodes every Monday morning, and you can find the show anywhere you listen to podcasts, including the How of Business YouTube channel and my website, thehowofbusiness.com. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you for listening to The How of Business. For more information about our coaching programs, online courses, show notes pages, links, and other resources, please visit thehowofbusiness.com.